particularly the CDC director saying that the travel risk for those who have been vaccinated are very, very low. And she even went so far as to say, with great caution, that you can travel, but always take precautions. The read on all of this on the vaccine front with Dr. Anthony Fauci, right now the White House chief medical advisor. Doctor, very good to have you. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you for having me, Neil.
Doctor, first off, on what the CDC director is saying, travel, okay, it's a little less risky for those who've been vaccinated. What about those who have not? What do you think, and how would you recommend travel for them?
Yeah, and it's very clear what we've been saying all along, and Dr. Walensky underscored this today, is that if you are unvaccinated, you should really avoid any unnecessary travel, only very essential travel. And if so, follow very carefully the CDC guidelines about mask wearing, et cetera. What she said today about people who are vaccinated, that the risk is low of getting infected. And there are certain things that you don't have to do. For example, you don't have to get tested before and after you travel, except if the destination requires it. And you don't have to quarantine yourself when you return from travel, for example, internationally. So there's the advantage now that's being articulated about getting vaccinated with regard to travel.
So what if you haven't been vaccinated? If you could recommend to family and friends of your own, doctor, they haven't been vaccinated, but they're itching to fly, the airlines are offering all sorts of deals to get them to fly, what would you tell them?
You know, I would tell them it's risky. If you're not vaccinated, it's risky, and you should probably limit travel to absolutely essential travel. Now, obviously, a lot of people have to travel for quite good reasons. And if you do, and you're going to do that, make sure you follow all the guidelines of safety and public health considerations. Wearing a mask, avoiding congregate settings. When you're at the airport, don't congregate around people. Keep your distances. We know when there is travel, when there are surges of travel, we see surges of infection. There's no doubt about that. And for that reason, we want to encourage people, as soon as they get availability for vaccination, please get vaccinated. The results, Neil, are extraordinarily favorable now. If you look not only at the efficacy in the clinical trial, but the real world effectiveness of vaccinations is most extraordinary. The more we learn about it, the more we see it, the more reports we get, we see how extraordinarily effective these vaccines are, as well as durable. I mean, the CDC came out with an MMWR, their weekly publication, looking at the real world effectiveness of vaccines, and it's really quite good. A great incentive for people to get vaccinated as soon as it becomes available to them.
But it's been bumpy abroad, right? In Europe right now, where a couple of countries, Italy and France, are in all but lockdowns on Easter weekend. In France, they're recommending you don't go to church because it's that worrisome. What do you think of that? Could that happen here?
Well, you know, it's interesting, that we generally, from the dynamics of the outbreak, are about 3 to 4 weeks behind what happens in Europe. And what we saw here was we had the big spike right after the holiday, Christmas and New Year's season, came precipitously down. Well, what it's done now, it's plateaued at an unacceptably high level, anywhere from 30, 40, 50, and now the most recent is 60,000 new cases a day. And it's been creeping up over the past several days to a week. That's a warning sign that there's a possibility that you're going to have a surge. That's exactly what they're seeing in Europe. They peaked up, they came down, they plateaued, and now several countries are having a surge. That's what we absolutely need to avoid in this country. And the way you avoid it is just stick by for a while longer. You know, it's kind of a race between getting people vaccinating and putting off a surge of new cases. Every day we get more than 3 million people vaccinated. Just yesterday, we had 3.9 million people vaccinated, which was really a record. 50 million Americans have been fully vaccinated, and 100 million have received at least one vaccine. So every day that goes by, we get better and better protected, which means that every day that goes by and we do that, we're getting closer to the point where we will be able to pull back safely on some of those guidelines. I know everybody is itching to do that. They want to do it. We all have COVID-19 fatigue. But if we could hang on a bit longer until we get more of a proportion of the country vaccinated, we'll be much better off and much less likely that when we do pull back, that we're going to get a surge.
You know, a critic of yours has been this Dr. Marty McCary, who says today, of course, this waiting to get to that certain level of vaccination doesn't appreciate the magnitude of herd immunity that develops at a much lower rate, that you're being too cautious, too tepid in your response, even when it comes to recommending masks. I believe you had said not too long ago, Doctor, well into 2022. What do you think of that, that you are being very, very, very cautious to the point of making it impossible to come out of this?
Well, first of all, let me respond to one thing that that person is saying, that he's just completely misunderstanding. Dr. McCary, what I'm talking about. Okay. He says, when I talk about herd immunity, I'm only considering people who are vaccinating. That's completely incorrect. When you talk about herd immunity, which is a bit of an elusive concept because we don't know exactly what that percentage is, it's a combination of the people who've already been infected and very likely are protected, plus the people who get vaccinated. Those are a group of people which together are individuals which are generally immune or protected. The greater that group is, contribution from both, those who've already been infected and those who are vaccinated, you get closer to the point where you have a blanket of protection over the community. Regarding being too cautious, we want to make sure that when we make recommendations, we do it on the basis of the science. You can anticipate and kind of, I wouldn't say guess, because that's a bit of a pejorative word, but you can say it is likely that something is the case, which is true. It is likely that if you are vaccinated, that you are not going to spread infection if you get infected without any symptoms. There's no doubt about that. I understand that as well as anybody else. But there is studies that are coming online now that are going to definitively prove that. And that's the reason why we say when that happens, we'll pull back on the recommendation of saying people who are vaccinated should continue to wear masks. It's very likely that they're not infective. But just to be sure and just to be cautious, you want to be conservative on the side of saying, wait till we get data where we could definitively prove that. It isn't just me.
But wearing masks into 2022, Doctor? Do you still stand by that?
Neil, that was taken, come on, let's get serious about this. That was taken totally out of context. What I was saying,
so you don't think that's right? You don't think I should have masks in 2022? That shouldn't be necessary.
We don't know, and I'm not saying that we will. If we get a major surge and we have a continuation of an increase in cases, it is conceivable that we may be having to wear masks in 2022. But if we continue to get people vaccinated and we get the overwhelming majority of people together with those that have been infected and the level of infection goes way down, we very likely will not have to. You know, we're playing this game here. You take a word or a sentence somebody says and you throw a gotcha at them. No, I did not say definitively we unquestionably will be wearing masks in 2022. I said under certain circumstances that might be conceivable that we would have to. But there are circumstances in which we may not have to.
All right. Well, the reason why I mentioned it is because Senator Marco Rubio, who respects you, wonders whether you've been consistent. He said Dr. Fauci is a very good public health official. His job is to advise policymakers and inform the public, but his job is not to decide what we can do, where we can go, or which places can open or close. And his job is not to mislead or scare us into doing the right things. What did you make of that?
Well, you know, Neil, I don't know how to answer that without, sounding hostile, because I'm not. I have a great deal of respect for the senator. I'm not trying to scare anybody. What we're saying is that we make recommendations based on scientific evidence and data, because what you want to do is give the American people the information they need to make choices, and you make a recommendation. I don't think anyone would consider me a scaremonger. I've never been that way at all. So when we talk about wearing a mask, not wearing a mask, doing this or not doing that, we like it to be based on evidence and data. And that's the way I have guided anything I've said for now the last 40 years. Nothing has changed.
Well, Mark Meadows, the former chief of staff for President Trump, says you have changed, doctor. He said Dr. Fauci is the same one who said that every recommendation he made to President Trump followed. Now we have an administration, we have a new Dr. Fauci that seems to forget some of the conversations that he and I had, that you've changed your views. What do you think of that?
You know, here again, I don't want to have a conflict with Mark Meadows. I know Mark. I like him. We got along really quite well during the Trump administration. I think is being a little bit misleading. Certainly, there were things that I said to President Trump that he absolutely agreed with and went along with. Everybody is also aware that there was some concerns that I had. And, you know, we don't want to rehash them because I don't want to be putting anyone down. But in general, I have been really quite consistent in what I've said. People can take words and sentences, pull them out of context, and say, well, he's been inconsistent about this and that. And you know, Neil, that's just not helpful because that becomes ad hominem as opposed to let's all pull together to get this outbreak behind us. So that's the reason why I really don't like to answer tit for tat with somebody says something about you, because I don't have any animus to any of them. I worked very well with them when we were in the Trump administration.
Yeah, and it might be the case, and I do notice that much of the criticism, in fact, the lion's share of it, Doctor, comes from those who work with you in the Trump administration. Peter Navarro actually went so far as to say you were the father of COVID. Lindsey Graham, last night saying that it was important for you to get down to the border and see the super spreader event that's going on there. What do you think of all of that? These are largely coming from Republicans who have serious animus toward some of the things that you recommend and say, and maybe just you, period.
You know, Neil, I've become sort of, for some reason or other, a symbol to them of what they don't like about anything that has to do with things that are contrary to them, anything outside of their own realm. It's a little bit bizarre, I would say. I mean, Lindsey Graham, who I like, he's a good person. I've dealt with him very, very well, over the years. Equating me with things that have to do at the border. I mean, I have nothing to do with the border. Peter Navarro saying I created the virus. I mean, how bizarre is that? I mean, think about that, Neil, for a second. I mean, is that a little weird? I mean, come on.
I think what Lindsey Graham was getting, other than mention this, because of the COVID spread at the border with all of these thousands who've been crammed in there, that maybe someone with your expertise should be down there just to monitor how worrisome a situation this is. Do you think it's a worrisome situation? Do you think it could be a super spreader event?
I mean, obviously, it is a very difficult situation at the border. We all know that. The administration is trying as best as they can to alleviate that situation. I mean, having me down at the border, that's really not what I do, Neil. You know what I do. I develop vaccines. I develop countermeasures. I mean, having me at the border, I don't know why they're saying I should be at the border any more than someone who has experience in those types of things. So it's really
are you worried, I guess, about the virus spread there, or whether that's something we should monitor, whether it's something that maybe we've lost sight of forget about just the throngs who have gotten there, but how this could lead to a spread of the virus?
You know, obviously, this is of concern to the administration. I mean, the president himself has expressed that. We don't want people to be coming over the border. I mean, when unaccompanied children do, they come under the auspices of HHS. When migrants enter, they come under the auspices of ICE. They're tested to the extent possible. If they're positive, they're quarantined. That's what I know about it. No one is denying that it is not a difficult problem at the border. I just was a little bit concerned when people equate what I do with the border. I mean, I don't know the reason for the animus But I'm really not quite sure. And quite frankly, Neil, I am so busy trying to do some important things to preserve the health and the safety of the American people that I can't be bothered with getting distracted with these people that are doing these ad hominems again. It doesn't bother me. You brought it up. It's one of those things that, if they want to do that, let them do it. I have more important things to do than worry about that.
So let me go right back to the virus, if I can, sir. I know you mentioned that we may not need this AstraZeneca vaccine. It's had a host of other issues, some blood clotting issues that have given some countries pause. But was that your way of saying I wouldn't welcome it here in this country? We've got the 3 that we're working on now. We don't need AstraZeneca. What did you mean by that?
No, what I was saying, it was merely a quantitative thing, Neil. We have contractual arrangements with with Pfizer. We have contractual relationships with Moderna. We have contractual relationships with J&J. We have more than enough vaccine to vaccinate everybody in this country and even have some in case we need to boost people. We, in fact, will be able to very likely share some of that with countries that need it. I think that the AZ vaccine is a good vaccine. It's going to play an important role in the global response. When the question was asked of me, do I think we'll be using AZ? I mean, everything is on the table, but I'm not sure we need yet again another product to be able to do with what we're doing. That's all I meant. There was nothing disparaging at all about AZ. I think it's going to have a very important role in the response globally. It's a good vaccine. It's got good efficacy.
Doctor, we're still waiting, and even the World Health Organization is a little bit discouraged about China's response to getting to the origins of this. Many have cited it started in Wuhan lab. I mean, others have come back and forth on that. I know you have doubts about that when it was raised by the former CDC director. But where are you on this, and whether the Chinese should be more forthcoming? And if they are never forthcoming, should that be a worry?
Well, I've in multiple times, Neil, in the past have expressed some concern about the transparency of the Chinese. I mean, I felt that right from the very beginning. When we had the cluster of cases in December of 2019, first we were told it all was jumping from an animal to a human, and there wasn't really spread from human to human. Then we found out there was spread from human to human. Then we found out the spread was really quite efficient from human to human. And then we found out that, in fact, the virus was transmitted by people who had no symptoms. So we went from something that was supposed to be only an animal to a human to something that clearly was human to human, and that was spread by people without symptoms. So obviously there's skepticism when you talk about the transparency. And with regard to the report, I'm not quite sure how that information was gathered. And that's the reason why there are a lot of talk about maybe going back and being a little bit more detailed and granular about how you got that information.
So with the vaccines going on right now, and you mentioned 3 million or the other, or more than 3 million a day, does that keep us bulletproof? I guess what I'm asking, Doctor, I mean, we take yearly flu shots. Will we have to do something like that for this going forward?
Neil, it is conceivable, because the thing that we don't know, and again, it gets back to what I was saying, is that as time goes by, you get more information and you act on the information. We don't know what the durability of the protection is. We know it's at least 6 to 8 months, but we don't know if it's a year or a year and a half or 2 years. So there are a lot of factors that'll go into whether or not we're going to require a boost and how often we'll require it. If the durability of the protection is really quite long and it does well against the invariable appearance of variants, we may not have to boost, or we may only need to do it very intermittently. If it looks like the durability of the protection is really limited to an extent to a year or so, we very well may need to boost people intermittently.
All right, Dr. Anthony Fauci, thank you very much, sir, for taking the time you did to address these and a host of issues. Out of fairness to you, I wanted you to respond to some of those criticisms that you've been receiving, and you did, and I appreciate that very, very much. Dr. Anthony Fauci, the White House
Thank you.
Chief Medical Advisor. All right.